Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to the concession stand here on the KB Radio Network. I am your host, Kevin Reed, and this is the review for the latest addition into the Ghostbusters franchise, the 2024 supernatural comedy Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, which is directed by Gil Kamen, starring Paul Rudd, Carrie Coon, Finn Woodhart, McKenna Grace, Kamel Nuhaji, Peyton Oswald, and some returning members of the cast from the original film in 1984. Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Ernie Hudson, Annie Potts, and William Arnott. And in this edition of Ghostbusters, it is set 2 years after the events of Ghostbusters Afterlife. The veteran Ghostbusters must join forces with their new recruits to save the world in New York City from a death-chilling god who seeks to build a new army. This film was set to be released last year, I think at Christmas. I think this was supposed to come out around Christmas, and it was delayed a few months, which is cool because now it comes out on the 40th year anniversary of the release of the original Ghostbusters film in 1984. And so, with all that, and coming off the heels of probably one of the best Ghostbusters films in the franchise, with Ghostbusters Afterlife, directed by Jason Reitman, who is the son of Ivan Reitman, who directed the first two Ghostbusters. This was a kind of anticipated film, and I absolutely adored Ghostbusters Afterlife. Loved it, loved it, loved it. Now, I was a little skeptical with this one going in because Jason Reitman chose not to direct this one, and he co-wrote it, but he chose not to direct it. All right, that's fine, but that kind of gets me a little nervous when a director just voluntarily steps away from a project. But I was still willing to give it a shot. We still had the returning cast from Afterlife. We got the returning cast from the original film. So, all right, let's see what we got. And then the trailers kind of sold me with this new threat that has arisen. All right, let's go. Let's roll with it. And I can say ultimately I was a little let down with Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. It didn't have that same magic. It didn't have that same feel that I felt when I watched Afterlife or the previous versions of Ghostbusters. It's not a bad film. The movie's good. It just didn't have that, I don't know, that magic. Before I get into plot points, let's get into the cast here. I always like to start off with the cast. Let's begin with Paul Rudd, who returns as Gary this go around. Paul Rudd is a joy to watch in every single film that he's in. I don't care if he's the star, co-star, cameo, whatever. Paul Rudd is a national treasure, and he needs to be protected at all costs. Absolutely love Paul Rudd. This film, he was just there. He really added nothing to the story, nothing to the plot, nothing to drive the story forward. They had something there, with the stepfather element, but they really didn't go there. They tiptoed around it the whole film, and I was confused by that. I was like, why is this such a secret? It's not so much a secret, but like a secret to the audience. The rest of the cast knew. I mean, the characters knew what was going on, but it was like they were keeping it from us, keep us guessing. And I'm sitting there like, well, everybody know what it is, why are they tiptoeing around it? But that character was just underwritten. It wasn't Paul Rudd per se. It was just underwritten. Carrie Coon as the mother, as Carly Spangler, the daughter of Egon. She didn't have her role was kind of sacrificed here. Um, She had nothing to do. Her and Paul Rudd had nothing to do other than to ride around and chauffeur McKenna Grace character around. It wasn't any arc for that character throughout this film. Speaking of McKenna Grace, who portrays Phoebe, who is basically the star of this film, uh, she was good. I, I enjoyed her. Her character is growing as she is growing. You know, she's a teenager now, and they really played into that with this film. And I enjoyed her character, even though there are elements going into the third act of this film where you kind of scratch your head, like, what is she doing? She's supposed to be this genius, and she did probably the stupidest thing you could ever think of. Towards the end of this film, and it was no point. It was no rhyme or reason why she did it. Oh my god. It's not, this is a non-spoiler review, so I'm not gonna go into what she did. But if you've seen the film, you know what she did. It was just dumb. It made zero sense what she did. And the lead up to that, the kind of quote unquote setup to that, made no sense to me. Finn Wolfhard, who portrays Trevor Spangler, you want to talk about underwritten and underused. Now, he was underwritten and underused in Afterlife, even more so here. His whole character arc is being able to drive the Echo One. That was his arc in the film. Everything else, he was just there to be there. There was nothing interesting about that character. Maybe his run-in with Slimer early on in the film. That was it. Other than that, it was just, oh, I'm 18. That was his dialogue throughout the film. Oh, I'm 18 years old now. I'm a grown man. That was it. There was nothing to that. Uh Camille Nanjadi, adore him. He probably was the best part of this movie, for a character who I thought was just going to be a one-off early on in the film, end up playing a bigger role as we got further into the film. I liked him. The character per se, no, especially his involvement with the end of this film, the climax of this film or the outcome of this film. I just didn't buy it. I didn't buy it, and this suffers. The film suffered because of that. It was just messy. Our returning legendary characters, cast, I should say, Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Ernie Hudson, Annie Potts. I think Ghostbusters Afterlife used them perfectly, perfectly, in the role that they played in that film. It was just the right amount. It wasn't too much of them, and it wasn't like they were underutilized. They were used perfectly for the moments they came in. All of it worked. In this film, no, it didn't work. Other than Ray, who was portrayed by Dan Aykroyd, who has a bigger role than anybody. He could have been co-lead of this film. He had just as much screen time as anybody else in this film. But other than him, no. Bill Murray was just there, basically to collect a check. And I hate to say that about Bill Murray. That's all that character was there for, to collect the check. Ernie Hudson had a bigger role, an important role, but even that was kind of wasted. It was, he was just conveniently there, you know, in certain situations. Annie Potts was just there because, God bless her soul, I think because she's one of the ones who are still alive from the first film. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but that's the way it seems because she had no point of being in this movie. None, zero, 0 point. Will Arlington, who you may remember from the 1984 film Walter Peck, the big antagonist of that film. Now he pops up in this film as the mayor of New York this go around. And he was there for nostalgic reasons. That's all I can say. That's the only thing I can think of. He's there to serve zero purpose, as contrast to his character in Ghostbusters from 1984, where he was the antagonist. Now he's just there to pop in and what, about three scenes and aggravate the Ghostbusters and go on about his business. And it was no point to that cat, other for nostalgic reasons. Let's move on to the plot. The plot of this film. It was interesting. They had some story elements throughout this film that, if they would have committed and went hard in the paint with them, I think would have been a very compelling story to tell. But for one reason or another, they chose not to go that route. You know, there's a storyline or a through line that goes through this movie with Phoebe that would have been interesting had they committed. They chose not to commit. And it felt like a wasted 2 hours, you know, because you're thinking we're going to get to a point and it doesn't get there. Uh, the villain, the head ghost or this demon god, uh, once again, could have been compelling, could have been more menacing. Wasn't, you know, it wasn't. And the end, the climax, this beam in the sky. I feel like I was watching a Marvel movie, you know, with the beam in the sky and the ghosts. Oh man, it just, they dropped the ball on this. They really did. All the elements were there. I think that's the most frustrating part about it. All the elements were there. It just didn't come together right. It felt rushed. This movie really felt rushed. Like, okay, we have to capitalize on Ghostbusters Afterlife success and come out with a sequel. And this is what they came with. Now, good idea, just wasn't executed properly, in my humble opinion. Now, it may seem like I absolutely hated this movie by everything that I'm saying here. No, there were story elements that I did like. I did like the family element, you know, the especially when we have the OG Ghostbusters and you have the new Ghostbusters in a sense with the Spangler family, and how that group works together and this group works together. That was cute. I like that. The chemistry between them all was great. Uh, thought it was good. I thought that was good. The design of the main villain in this film was awesome. I love the design of it. The special effects in a couple of scenes, it didn't look right, especially when they did close-ups. But certain scenes, that thing looked, ooh, you know, like, man, this could possibly keep me up at night. You know, this was a chilling looking thing, but uh, it was a couple of scenes where just the close up scenes, the close up to him was like, oh man, that just didn't work, didn't quite get there, but it was overall cool little villain. Wish there was more of it. You know, I got elements of Ghostbusters too. You know, with what was the villain's name in that? Vigo. Yeah, Vigo. And he didn't really come into play until the third act, and that was deep into the third act. That's how it felt with this villain, and it was so much setup, so much going on throughout the film, and a potential threat that can take place if this villain is unleashed. And when that actually happens, you know, it really didn't hold the stakes that it was set up to hold, you know, and that was very discouraging. And so that's why it's kind of upsetting that the film turned out the way that it did. And at the end of the day, I still hold true. I did enjoy it. It may seem like I didn't. It was an all right time in the theater. It's a good movie. It's not the worst Ghostbusters film that I've seen. Uh, It's not even the second worst. And they only made five of them, so that's a good number to be in. But at the end of the day, it's a good watch. Seen it once, probably won't see it for a while again. And as far as them making any more Ghostbusters films, I think they need to pump the brakes and maybe wait a little while until a fresh idea arises. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, which is currently in theaters, gets a letter grade of a C plus. Yeah, it's average. It's not the greatest, but it's not the worst either, and that's that's more important than anything. But I would like to know, what did you think of Ghostbusters Frozen Empire? Did you enjoy it? And where do you rank it amongst the Ghostbuster films? I would like to know. Email the show, kbradiopodcast at gmail.com. You could also search for the KB Radio Network on all social media platforms. Just search for the KB Radio Network. Also, don't forget about subscribing and liking this video if you're listening on YouTube. Just subscribe to the KB Radio Network channel. Also, don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, and sharing this show. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you are currently listening to the concession stand here on the KB Radio Network. Everybody, thank you for joining me for this review of Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Can't wait to speak to you on the next go around. I want you all to know that I love you. Continue to love everyone. And until we speak again, you all be blessed.